glad you have joined us today. We are starting our fall sermon series. We've been talking about it for well over a year now. It's actually part two of a sermon series we started last fall, Battle for the Bible. In that sermon series, Battle for the Bible, we laid out the evidence to prove that the Bible is true. This is kind of part two in that we're going to lay out the evidence of certain doctrines, certain truths that are unchangeable. So the entire sermon series has been titled Unchangeable. Unchangeable. So we're going to share with you for the next several weeks some unchangeable truths from the Bible that Jesus taught. Not only did Jesus teach these unchangeable truths, but the community of faith for many, many years, hundreds of years, actually for over a couple thousand years, the community of faith have handed these truths off to the next generation. These are truths no matter what. And no amount of scientific information will change these absolute truths. No amount of new medical information will change these absolute truths. No amount of behavioral therapy will change these absolute truths. No amount of new academia learning will change these absolute truths. What we're going to share with you are certain truths that I would say is written in stone, unchangeable, concrete truths of our faith as followers of Jesus Christ. Now, you know as well as I know, we're living in a very polarized world. We really are. There are people to the far right that have certain beliefs. Far right, that's to my left. And there's people to the far left, they have their certain beliefs. And no matter what you say to them, they will not change what they believe because they believe their beliefs are certainly true. But we also are living in a time when new information brings about new facts, and with new facts, we change what we believe. Because all of a sudden, now we understand something a little more, we may change what we believe. And you know as well as I know, there are certainly some things we need to change. However, one of the unique truths about Christianity is there are certain truths that the Bible teaches us, that Jesus teaches us, that the Orthodox Church teaches us, that are unchangeable, non-negotiable, unperishable. No matter what someone says, no matter what someone else may find out, there are certain truths in the Bible that cannot and will never be changed. And so the question you ask, so Brother Jeff, what are those truths? Well, I am glad you asked. So let's start in the beginning. Many Christians do not accept the Genesis narrative of creation as truth. There are more questions than answers, such as, did Adam and Eve really live? Was there a real place that was the Garden of Eden? And if there was a real place, why can't we find it today? And another question that is asked, was the serpent in the Garden of Eden, was he really the devil? Was it a 7-day creation narrative, literal or figurative? And why are there two creation stories rather than one? Because there's one story in Genesis 1, and then there's another creation story in Genesis 2. And the more critical issue at hand is the fact that very similar creation narratives, much older than the Genesis narrative, are found in the creation stories in Egypt and the Mesopotamia. Oh yeah, I almost forgot the real hard questions. What about the dinosaurs? Everybody wants to know about the dinosaurs. Where are they at in the Bible? And what about the cavemen? What about the cavemen? Where are they in the Genesis story? And how old is the earth? Is it 10,000 years old? Because the Bible would kind of explain that it's about 10,000 years old. Or is the earth millions and millions of years old? And I've left out a couple of more questions you may want to consider. What about evolution, natural selection, and the Big Bang Theory? Now, let me demonstrate a little humility here. And let me just add a disclaimer. This sermon today in answering all of your questions, I will not be able to do that to your satisfactory. Matter of fact, to answer all of your questions is beyond my paid grade. However, isn't it true that just because something doesn't make sense to you doesn't mean it's untrue? That's right. So let me give you an example of that. If someone told me several years ago that I could hold a device in my hand, such as a cell phone, put in a few numbers and talk to somebody 10,000 miles away, I would say, you know what, I don't understand that, and because I don't understand that, I don't believe it. But the truth of the matter is, it is true, although I don't understand it. While I was working on my last educational degree, one of the books that I was required to read was written by a well-known atheist by the name of Richard Dawkins. The book he wrote, he titled The God Delusion. This book sold over 3 million copies. Now, Richard Dawkins is a highly educated man, leaps and bounds smarter than I could ever possibly imagine being. I mean, the guy is absolutely academic brilliant. But in his book, he makes a statement about creation that absolutely baffles me, and how someone with any common sense could actually believe that it was true. I'm going to read you his quote, and then I'll let you make your decision. He says this, think about it. On one planet, and possibly only on one planet, in the entire universe, that planet being Earth, molecules that would normally make nothing more than complicated than a chunk of rock gather themselves together into chunks of rock-sized matter of such staggering complexity that they're capable of running, jumping, swimming, flying, seeing, hearing, capturing and eating other such animated chunks of complexity, capable in some cases of thinking and feeling and falling in love with yet other chunks of complex matter. And then he says this, we now understand essentially how this trick, he calls it a trick, is done, but only since 1859. And all of you people in school, you know what took place in 1859. Before 1859, he goes on and says, it would have seemed very, very odd indeed. Now, thanks to Darwin, it is merely very odd. Now, let me explain to you what Richard Dawkins has just said. He has said that humanity came forth by chunks of rocks. Now, I tell you what we need to do. This is going to be a long sermon. As a matter of fact, we're going to stand here for 1 trillion years, and we're going to watch these rocks somehow, some way, become living beings and form a mind and a body that is so complex that even today, scientists truly don't know exactly how the human body works. But now these rocks, according to Darwin and according to Richard Dawkins, these complex matter, these complex rocks, they'll form themselves in such a complexity, it's very hard to understand. But somehow, some way, throughout billions and trillions of years, these things became a human being that was capable of running and walking and talking and loving one another with feelings. Now, I'm a Christian. And Christianity is built on one word. Well, 2 words, faith and Jesus. But I'd have to say, in order for me to believe this, it's going to take a whole lot more faith than it does believing in Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2. My question that I would love to ask the professor is this: where did the rocks come from in the first place? Obviously, he would answer real quick and say, well, it came from the rock-sized matter or molecules. My next question would be, well, doctor, where does the molecules come from? Now, before I throw science out the window, which I will not do, the question that every theory, every scientist about creation must wrestle with, did it have help? Was there a divine being involved? What you need to understand is this: nothing plus nothing equals nothing. And if you don't believe in God, and if you don't believe in creation, you believe that nothing came from nothing, and nothing from nothing forms something. You know, as I know, nothing plus nothing equals nothing. Moses, in writing the creation account, was explaining to the children of Israel where they came from and what God has done for them and how God has created all things. So let's look at a few selective verses from Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created. Moses wants you to understand, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. So for Moses, the earth was already here. It could have been here for millions or trillion years, but it was without form and void. And darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Verse 4, and God saw that the light and that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. Verse 11, then God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seeds, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth," and it was so. Verse 16, then God made two great lights, the greater light to rule over the day, and the lesser light to rule over the night. And I love this. And it's like Moses all of a sudden throws in, oh, by the way, He made all the stars also. And then God moves toward the crown of His creation. Then God said, "Let us," and again, the word "us" is plural. Who's He talking about? Many theologians will argue right here, the Spirit of God hovering us is Christ also involved in creation. And you see that in Colossians. In other words, this is the Trinity. Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish, over the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created him. Male and female, He created them. Now, when Moses wrote this, he was not thinking about your science book. See, that's the problem sometimes in Christianity. We get so... We want to make the Bible to fit our belief. We want to make the Bible to fit our science. The Bible was never, ever written, intended to fit your science. And so when he writes this, he's not thinking about your science book. He's not thinking about natural selection. He's not thinking about the Big Bang Theory. And believe me, God may have caused the Big Bang, which created the heavens and the earth. But the question is, who lit the fuse? Who created the Big Bang? Thomas Oldham is a guy you've probably never heard of. But Thomas Oldham has written one of the most definitive works on systematic theology in the 20th century. He states this: the Bible does not rule out scientific cosmologies and other ways of understanding the primitive history of the world. And then he goes on and he says this. He also states, the scriptural witness to creation is from the first line more like a drama, the beginning of the acts of God. It's like, okay, this is how it's going to start. The beginning acts of God. the first of many mighty deeds upon which hinges both life's current meaning and the eternal destinies of its participants. Moses' purpose was not to show how all things fit together in a perfect way that makes sense to you. That was not his purpose. For Moses and the Hebrew children, this is how God chose to break and to bring in humanity. What does the creation story teach us about God? It teaches us that God is the creator and that God fit all of this together in His plan and in His purpose and not in our necessarily thought of plan and purpose. So, let's get down to the main stuff. This is what you must know about God and creation. Number one, this is unchangeable. Absolutely unchangeable. God is eternal. God is eternal. In the beginning, God is eternal. He has no beginning. One of the things so many children ask, I've heard them ask me at this church, where did God come from? God didn't come from anywhere. God has always been here. Well, God had to come from someplace. No, He didn't. God is eternal. And see, when we think about things being eternal, our mind cannot comprehend that because we are temporal people. We are not eternal. And so we want to try to take something that is eternal and put it in our temporal mind so that it makes sense to us. That will never happen with God because God is outside of our mind and our thought. God is eternal. The world that we live in is not eternal. God always is, God has always been, and God will always be. Deuteronomy 33:27, He says this, the eternal God, the what God? The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are His everlasting arms. How long do they last? Everlasting. He will drive out your enemies before you say and destroy them. Psalms 90:2 says, before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world, from what's the word? From everlasting to everlasting, you are God. The psalmist is saying, this God is eternal. Before there was a world, before there was mountains, God was there. See, God has to be eternal, so that He can offer you eternal life. The idea of eternity runs like a lofty mountain range throughout the entire Bible. Everywhere you turn, you find it. In fact, all of the treasured biblical doctrines and truths would collapse without the reality of an everlasting God. Romans 1:20 speaks of His eternal power and Godhead. Romans 9:5 calls Him the eternal blessed God. Ephesians 3:11 speaks of His eternal purpose. 1 Timothy 1:17 calls Him the King, eternal, immortal, invisible. Genesis 21:33 says He's the everlasting God. Psalms 100 says He is the Lord, is good. His mercy is everlasting, and His truth endures to all generations. Again, throughout the Bible, this is an unchangeable truth that God is eternal and He is the only eternal God. David Jeremiah, many of you listen to him. He's quite a preacher and a pastor. He says this, talking about God being eternal. He says this, I know we can't fully comprehend that truth, and we can't, can we? But that's all right. A God who is small enough to be understood. Oh, you watching at home, if you'd help me, I'd start preaching. Is it big enough to be worshiped? Wow. God, by definition, must be infinitely great. If we have a God we can grasp, He ceases to be God. By definition, God must be incomprehensible. If we could unravel the mysteries of His person, we would elevate ourselves to His level, which we cannot. So I want you to understand. I want everybody to understand. I want your children to understand. I want your grandchildren to understand. And maybe you who are listening, maybe you're not even a believer. One of the things that our faith tells us that God is eternal. It's unchangeable. The second thing in the Genesis account, it tells us that God is the creator. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I don't know if it was a big bang. But if it was a big bang, this is how God did it. God created the heavens and the earth. God is the author of creation, not Darwin. Isaiah 40:28 says, "Have you not known? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, He neither faints nor is weary. His understanding is unsearchable." Isaiah the prophet understood that God was much bigger than he was and that God was the creator of all. God is the creator, not the created. Our faith teaches us that God is the creator of all things. God spoke and creation began to form. And His prized creation is found in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, where He created male and female in His image. You as a living, breathing person, you are the crown of God's creation. Paul says in Ephesians, he uses a word that says you are God's masterpiece. And because God created you, only God can define you. You and I, again, let me say it again, are the crown of His creation. From the moment, now listen to me, from the moment of conception, God is created. Whether that conception is in sin or not, that does not matter. At the moment of conception, God is creation. God is creator. And you and I, being the crown of His creation, we must understand that life is so important to God. And life, listen to me, life starts in the womb. In the womb. And for us to wrestle with the idea that we can play God and we can determine whether life is in the womb or not is a very dangerous thing, because God is the creator of life. Life is a precious gift from God, and don't be fooled that it does not start in the womb, because it does. The heavens declare the glory of God, Psalms 19:1. Flowers demonstrate His care, Matthew chapter 6, verse 28. The seas, or the oceans, listen to me, own Him as their master, Mark 4:39. If God is not the creator of life, now listen to me, I want you to think about this. If God is not the creator of life, and there's no God that created us, then you and I are not human beings. You and I do not have a soul. We do not have a body. We're nothing, you know what? We're not even classified as animals. We're just some group of rocks that came together and began to live and breathe. And if God has not created us, listen to me, there is no you inside of you. There is nothing there, an empty hole, but you know and I know there is something there. There is a soul, there is a spirit, and that's the reason you have the opportunity to love and to be loved, to feel sorrow and to feel happy. Why? Because God is the creator of you. Now, I want to make sure that we get these things correct. God is eternal, God is creator, and one more thing that we see in this narrative, God is sustainer. In the second creation story in Genesis, and I'm sure you may want to have a question about that, but that's fine. In the second creation story in Genesis 2:17, it says this, "And the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground, and He breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being." God created, God sustained life. In other words, it was because of God that man became a living being. God is the sustainer of life. Without Him, there is no life. God is the author of life. God breathed into the nostrils, and life woke up and became alive. Jesus talked about God being the sustainer when he says in Matthew 6:26 that he feeds the birds of the air and he grows the lilies of the field. It was Jesus' way of saying, you know what? God sustains his creation, and you being the crown of his creation, he's going to sustain you. So let me give you a word of encouragement. God is going to sustain you. It doesn't matter that we are in a pandemic or war or protest or whatever word you may want to add. You got a Heavenly Father that is greater than anything else going in this world. And when you put your faith in His Son, Jesus Christ, I will let you know God is going to sustain you through your entire life. That is the promise. God has been sustaining His people throughout the entire Bible. It's one big story how God sustains His people. The earth is the Lord and all that's in it. The earth will not end until God says so, because God sustains this earth. Nothing will cause this earth to dissipate and disappear until God allows it to happen. God has the world in the palm of His hands. This is what the creation story teaches us. So, God is eternal, God is creator, and God is sustainer. These attributes of God revealed to us in the Genesis narrative, these are unchangeable truths. These are hills we die on. You will not convince us anything any less. This is foundational truth that not only do you need to embrace, but you need to teach your children and grandchildren to embrace them, that God is creator, God is sustainer, God is eternal. So, what is the unchangeable truth? I put it in one phrase for you. Write it down. God is before all things. God created all things. God sustains all things. Now look, when I use the word all things, that means what? All things. There is nothing outside of this. God is before all things. God has created all things, and God sustains all things. Now let's wrap this up. The question that must be considered now is this. What difference does it make, Brother Jeff? What difference does it make if I believe in Jesus, but I do not believe in Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2, or what you refer to as the creation story? What difference does it make? If I've got Jesus, what difference does it make if I choose not to believe in the Genesis account? This is a good question. Let me say this. You can't move away from something without moving towards something else. So the very moment you move away in your belief system from Genesis chapter 1 and 2, the very moment you move away from that, you begin to move toward what? Something else. Now, isn't that true? Right? Now, you may not actually know what that is yet, okay? You may not, but I'm telling you, you can't move away from something without moving towards something else. So let me say this. The moment you move away from our faith teaching that's been handed down for thousands of years is the moment, I believe, you move away from the greatness, the wonder, and the creativity of God. And I don't want to be there. God is before all things. God created all things. And God sustains all things. And that is a truth that you can rely on. Well, what about Adam and Eve? Tune in next week and we'll talk about Adam and Eve. But in the meantime, God is before all things, God created all things, and God sustains all things. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and may His face shine upon you. I'm glad you joined us. In Jesus' name, Good night and goodbye.